Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Real National Dialogue with myself, Jonathan Mokes, and Paul Berkowitz. Paul, how are you doing today?
Jonathan, I'm great. It looks like spring has come early to Johannesburg. It's nice to have you back after a well-earned, well-deserved holiday of a couple of weeks. How things are on your side?
No, good. It was good to have a break, but obviously things didn't stop moving in my absence, sadly. So there's a lot to talk about today, a lot in the news, and we've got I think, a nice menu of items stretching from current news items into a look at by-elections, and also a little bit of a discussion on DA polling that was leaked and then subsequently criticized. So that gives us a little bit to uh, dig our teeth into today. So I think let's get straight into it and maybe have a little bit of a roundup on sort of key stories hitting the news of late. And let's kick off, Paul, with the criminal justice crisis or criminal justice cluster crisis. I think one of the big stories that hit recently was the fact that Vusumuzi Kat Matlala, who was implicated by Lieutenant General Makwenazi in his explosive press conference a couple of months ago, had received up to 10 missed calls from Bheki Cele about just before the tender that Matlala was there that had was cancelled. And it begs the question, how deep and for how long has the rot in the criminal justice cluster system existed?
Yes, Jonathan. So that story came out, I think, over the weekend. As you said, Cele, former police minister himself, called Matlala up to 10 times in a single day. Matlala had been awarded a 360 million rand tender from SAPS, and this tender was subsequently cancelled. Matlala was arrested. Cele has gone on record saying he's neither a friend nor a business partner of Matlala, but the cell phone records seem to belie that. Cele apparently also stayed at Matlala's luxury penthouse apartment after the tender was awarded. Seems to be a theme in general, Jonathan, and today that politically compromised people are staying at the luxury accommodation of other the property owned by other people, but that they seem to be inextricably linked to.
Yeah. No, definitely. Sadly, the answers to the numerous questions we all have about this are going to be delayed because news or breaking news that's come out today has been that the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, so obviously the Commission of Inquiry set up by President Ramaphosa after those allegations last week, uh, uh, Justice Madlanga indicated that the commission's work was going to start on Monday, the 1st of September, so next week, Monday. Sadly, they've said that it will no longer start on the 1st of September because it's been delayed by procurement delays from the Department of Justice. So essentially meaning that the Department of Justice has had to procure certain infrastructure requirements that the Commission needs in order to do its work. It hasn't been able to deliver on that. Therefore, the Commission is unable to start work. It can't give a date as to when it will start work. It did mention in a statement released today that it's already a number of months into this deadline when it has to get an interim report out. And sadly, and I say sadly because people want answers, people want accountability, South Africans deserve to know what's going on with this. The critique that President Ramaphosa received for yet another commission that drags on and drags on, doesn't give any results, is proving already to be very true because allegations like we've just mentioned about Bheki Cele compound and compound and compound. The commission has no start date in sight, and this can only be sort of leading one to, I suppose, conclude that this is probably what the government want for it to be dragging on and on and on until their term finishes, or is that too cynical of me?
I don't know if it's too cynical. It might just be the right touch of cynicism, Jonathan. I think for years, pre 94, there's been this accusation that commissions of inquiry are there to slow down justice and not to speed it up. Interestingly, we're not going to talk about it today, but no one, the dozens of ANC
Mm.
members implicated in the Zondo Commission, no one's been arrested, no one's been censured. I don't think anyone's been really hauled in front of the Integrity Commission and denied a job. But those very same people, a few of them have are possibly targets for targeted US sanctions. Whether those bills pass in the US seems doubtful, but it seems some US lawmakers are more excited about the outcomes and the notes from the Zondo Commission than our lawmakers are.
Mm. Yeah, it's disappointing, to say the very, very least, and one can only hope that these infrastructure delays get resolved as quickly as possible so we can kick on. In another sort of big story that hit the news recently and relates to, let's put it this way, ANC corruption allegations, is the ongoing drip feed in relation to sagas involving the Deputy President Paul Mashatile and, by all accounts, the front runner to take over the presidency of the ANC. So Mashatile's son-in-law is going to be in court, or is in court, over a million or 12 million rand housing loan.
Yes, Jonathan. So Mashatile's son-in-law, Ngeba Nonkwelo, he has a company. He's got a couple of companies. His company, Nonkwelo Investments, received a loan from the Gauteng Partnership Fund way back in 2017. And the timeline is a bit more complicated than that because there were loan guarantees and there was an approved loan amount which was not completely drawn down. But the facts as they are is that the Gauteng Partnership Fund made a loan of 7.2 million to Nonkwelo Investments. They are demanding that that loan now be returned plus 5.4 million in interest. So that's 12.6 million that Nonkwelo is in court for. The link, the smoke behind what may or may not be a fire that links Nonkwelo to Paul Mashatile, there's a couple of things. Mashatile was, from 2016 until early 2018, he was the MEC of Human Settlements in Gauteng. The Gauteng Partnership Fund is a vehicle for making loans for housing projects. The loan that went to Nonkwelo was ostensibly for building low-cost accommodation and student housing. Apparently, to date, even though the project was initiated in 2013, not one house has been built, or not one structure. While Mashatile was MEC of Human Settlements, he tried to interfere with the GEPF to repurpose it so that it would be in charge of all mega housing projects in the province. He also tried to establish a 30 billion rand fund using PIC money, would have used PIC money that the GEPF would have administered. And here is the final juicy part of the story, Jonathan. The waterfall property that Mashatile has been using but claims he doesn't own is owned by, you guessed it, Ngeba Nonkwelo, son-in-law, through another investment holding company. So at this point, Jonathan, there are no direct links to the money that was spent but nothing was built that the GEPF now want back, and the waterfall property, but there is too much smoke going on. It seems every time we record, or every second week, Jonathan, there's another story about Mashatile, a family member, an extended family member, big contracts, juicy tenders, and a man who's living way beyond the salary that he gets as deputy president.
Mm. As the cliche goes, there's no smoke without fire, and there seems to be a considerable fire all over the country when it comes to the deputy president. And of course, everybody is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But it would seem that there are just allegations upon allegations upon allegations that center around the deputy president. He is the front runner. It's always murky in the world of the ANC as to, in order to be able to ascertain exactly how much of a front runner he is, but it would appear that it would be quite easy to make a lot of allegations stick on the deputy president. Not to say though that the ANC really cares about electing, let's put it this way, clean, uncorruptible officials. But certainly, I think there's more than enough fuel to go into the fire for opposition parties to the ANC to really dig deep into Mashatile if he were to be elected as ANC president ahead of 2029, and it could have the effects a Mashatile ANC presidency, very much a hypothetical scenario of really hurting the ANC even more as they progress to 2029, because it does not seem that these allegations are going away, and it seems that there is a concerted effort driven to make sure that every allegation surrounding Mashatile is aired quite exhaustively by the press.
Yes, and there's obviously speculation, and it's a good question to ask who is leaking all of this to the
Mm,
press. Shatila
mm,
obviously has enemies, and we know that particularly within the ANC and its election battles, there are strategic leaks to damage this front runner or that front
mm,
runner. But it doesn't make any of this any more true or less true or less of a concern. And I know that in a couple of minutes, Jonathan, we'll look at some recent polling. But
mm,
we've spoken in the past about the importance of having a party leader that has visibility, that is recognizable, and has got a good favorability rating.
mm.
All the polls we've seen so far, Jonathan, put Ramaphosa as the best or the least worst front runner for the
Absolutely.
ANC. And you have to think with Mashatile and the stink following him around, what that translates into in terms of share of the vote that will be lost in the next couple of elections.
Yeah. No, without a doubt, and we'll dig into that polling as you suggested in a couple of minutes. But before we get there, just maybe another negative story for the ANC that has done the rounds over the past weekend. We're recording on Tuesday today. Is that around the recently appointed Minister of Higher Education and Training, Buti Manamela? So I find this very bizarre. So the SETA appointments and controversies around that were central in the firing of Nabuhle Nkobane, his predecessor. Now we read that Buti Manamela, has been given the deadline of actually today to account to the Portfolio Committee on Higher Education and Training at Parliament about the process that has led to three seaters. I think the ones for local government services and construction education and training all being placed under administration. The DA and the EFF have again been incredibly critical about the appointment of these administrators. And it seems, and I don't know whether he has or will be meeting the deadline of today, it seems that he will be appearing before the portfolio committee before long to be grilled. But it seems again that there's a lot of smoke around seaters in higher education and training, and it goes far beyond the former minister in Nkobane.
Yes, and I think it was just a month ago, Jonathan, when we were, if not singing Buti Manamela's praises, saying
Mm,
that he was a choice, a replacement that seemed to be well liked and well respected across the aisle. But here, as you said, we've got um, the same mess, the same opacity around seaters. And this is a little bit worse, it seems to
mm,
me, Jonathan, than what Nkabane did. And there's two issues to me. The one is both Nkabane and Manamela are accused of appointing people without consultation. In Manamela's case, of appointing people, all three administrators, that have a whiff of corruption behind
yeah.
them, that have been linked to other questionable political and financial activities in their previous jobs. But the second point, Jonathan, is it's not a case of appointing seater heads. Manamela appointed administrators, even though the boards of these seaters, I'm not sure of all of them or just one or two of the three, spoke out against this, said, why are we placing the seaters under administration? The board hasn't been allowed to do its work for months or even years. So there's an extra layer here for me, Jonathan. not just appointing questionable people, which the ANC unfortunately has a very long track record of doing, but appointing administrators where the boards themselves so that they could function if they were given the chance.
Yeah.
What is the goal of placing these seats under administration and not allowing them to function properly?
Mm. Yeah, that is the great unanswered question, and I think it'll be important to follow up on this story as things unfold this week. It'll be interesting to see what his submission is, what the portfolio committee responds, and we can come back to this to really dig into it, because I think it's worth following up on. It's such an important sector, higher education, in terms of producing the skills that are needed to enable people to access jobs, because it's not only unemployment that is the big issue. It's actually being able to get people to access vacant jobs. But we need to talk more about this, because the ANC just seems to be lurching from problem to problem, crisis to crisis, which, as we've alluded to a number of times now, is affecting their electoral state. Now, on the polling, and just bear with me, because I'm just going to, for the sake of our listeners and viewers, just give a summary of the polling information that was allegedly leaked to Report on Sunday. It was covered in Report's sister publication, the City Press, and this comes from internal DA polling. Now, we know that the DA has a very sophisticated and extensive polling operation that does regular polling. It is preparing for the local government election, and understandably is doing regular tracking polling, but also looking specifically at the larger metros. Now, at a national level, the apparently, and according to Report and City Press, internal DA polling has the ANC currently at 29%, and the DA 1 percentage point below it at 28%. It then has MK at 11, the EFF at 8, and the IFP, the next biggest party, at 3%. Importantly, this is modeled at a turnout of 100%, so it isn't modeled for your kind of turnout differentials that organizations such as the Social Research Foundation and others do. And it's also done on a 14-day moving average. What that means is it has a specific sample. I think the DA sample is about 1,800. So it's obviously doing a number, let's say a couple of hundred of interviews or 100 interviews a day, and it will drop off the oldest particular day in favor of the current day to sort of keep it. And it's important to look at specific trends. Maybe before I go on to the metros, let's look at this national polling. So firstly, it is turnout at 100%. It is a 14-day moving average. There's a sizable margin of error, probably of about 4 percentage points, if indeed, and I think, and I say if indeed this is the DA polling, but I don't think City Press and Report would have run this if it wasn't coming from the DA polling operation. We have seen some polling since the beginning of the year have the ANC slightly down on its election results of last year, although interestingly, the Social Research Foundation had the ANC back at 40% in its last poll in June, but the South African Institute of Race Relations actually had the DA ahead of the ANC by 1 percentage point. But I think regardless of the specific percentages, the trends in all polling clearly are showing that the ANC is significantly vulnerable, that the DA is doing relatively well. I do want to emphasize a caveat I made and also included in my piece on the state of the DA, that DA's polling does not take account of the so-called squeeze factor, where it does drop off in its black support or support from black voters on election day. So if the DA is at 28%, a more realistic percentage point on an election day would be 25 or 26. But 25 or 26 percentage points is still 2 to 3 percentage points higher than what it got in the last general election. So all accounts that this polling would say that the ANC is in trouble. And what I also found quite interesting, because there's been a couple of leaks about a polling, and comment has been sought from the ANC. The ANC actually hasn't countered this in any significant fashion. So it pretty much probably is on the money in terms of a trend. And again, Mashatile coming to the forefront as a potential presidential candidate is only going to make the ANC even weaker.
Yes. Yes, I think you've raised most of the important caveats when it comes to the methodology, Jonathan. Looking at these national figures, as you said, a turnout of 100% is not realistic, and that has to be taken into account. But also because the national poll is working on a 14-day moving average, you've explained it. You drop out the oldest survey points and you include the newest ones. This is very useful if it's going to be updated weekly or fortnightly at looking at direction and trends.
Mm,
So we may quibble and we may say that if we control for these different parts of the methodology, these numbers may go up or down, but I think the direction of movement nationally for this party or that party would be important and would be more solid numbers, regardless of how you tinker with the methodology.
yeah.
I'm looking at the polls on the metro level.
Yeah.
As you said again, a margin of error there of 8%. So take with a big pinch of salt, but at least modeled for turnout of 56%, which would be pretty much what we looked at last year, possibly a bit lower to take into account an upcoming local election. Of course, turnout could drop further. It's interesting that in all three major Gauteng metros, Jonathan, according to the DA's polls, the DA is way ahead of the ANC. In Ekurhuleni, for example, the poll has the DA at 41% and the ANC at 19%, which is huge, which is more than double the ANC share of the vote. It would put the DA in the driver's seat that almost definitely be leading coalitions in those three Gauteng metros if those numbers were maintained. Even eThekwini DA at 44% seems to me to be very optimistic. The other polls we've seen put MK at the front in that
Mm,
metro. So that's something I would also question, and I'd want to have a look at some of those follow-up polls. As you said, Jonathan, if Zilla has a way, there will be no more leaks. I could see why she wouldn't like the leaking of the poll. Anything which might galvanize or wake up the ANC or some of the other parties to campaign harder would make the DA's job harder. Of course, maybe a rhetorical question whether the ANC is able to get its act together and start campaigning properly in the face of these numbers. But there is a long way to go. There's a year, maybe a year and a half between now and the election, and a lot is going to change.
yeah. Now, look, we very, very early out, and I think that that point has been made. But I suppose not that early. It's if the election's in November this time next year, it'll be very much campaign season. I think you've said about Helen Zille, so she's come out, I think today or late yesterday, indicating that one has to actually take these polls, particularly in the metros, with a pinch of salt because the margin of error is incredibly high. 8%. You don't want to be releasing polls with a margin of error of 8% because it's not that helpful. So I think very, very notable that she clearly is upset that this polling was leaked. And there clearly is a coordination issue there in terms of who's leaking and who has the authorization to leak. But nevertheless, it has been leaked. I think that in the city of Johannesburg, Tshwane and Ekurhuleni, the DA probably is a little bit ahead of the ANC, but I wouldn't think by those vast numbers that the polling indicates. I think what is very notable about Tshwane, so from the DA's polling, it had the DA at 48%, the ANC at 27%, the Freedom Front Plus at 9%, and the EFF at 7%. What I find interesting about that, again, with the huge caveat of a margin of error, is that actually means that the DA and the Freedom Front Plus could form a coalition.
By themselves.
which would
Yeah.
be a very, very much more whether you one likes it or not, it would be a lot more stable in respect of trying to have a kind of two-party coalition, probably more ideologically coherent in terms of centre right. So that is probably something to watch. I think what Action SA would not have liked is the fact that the DA polling has them at 2% in Tshwane, which obviously is a metro that they hold the mayoral chain on.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing, and it's a point we consistently make when we talk about by-elections, is that the DA polling has MK at 7% in Joburg and at 11% in Ekurhuleni. So again, MK a big factor still in Gauteng. And if these percentages for the ANC slightly increase and the DA drops a bit, MK are certainly within reach of being part of a potential coalition government in some of these metros in Gauteng and like they are in other municipalities. I completely agree with you, Paul. The eThekwini figure, where I think the DA is at 44 and MK is at 31%, ANC at 14%. Probably the DA's percentage is highly inflated there. I think it's probably more MK sitting in the late 30s, early 40s, but the ANC definitely in trouble in eThekwini, as we've spoken about before. The last metro to mention is obviously Cape Town, which according to DA polling, has the DA at 61%, the ANC at 19%, and the PA at 9%. That kind of more mirrors, certainly from a DA ANC point of view, where the DA was in the 2016 local government election. I think the ANC percentage is probably about on point there from what we've seen in other polling. I would say the DA is probably a little bit inflated, and the PA, I would actually say, are probably a little bit underestimated based on what we've seen. Last word before I hand over to you, and then we can move on to some other topics, is what I do find really interesting is that of all the metros leaked, there's one very important one for the DA that was not leaked, and that's Nelson
Nelson
Mandela
Mandela
Bay
Bay.
Metro. And I,
Yeah.
I find that interesting. I wonder if it's not showing the numbers the DA would like there.
Yes. So, yeah, I think that's a question that other people would have as well, Jonathan. We are internally, as you know, but the listeners are going to find out over the next few days. We're doing some focused research on Nelson Mandela Bay and to look what might happen with job losses in the automotive industry, what could be the political economy fallout. So look out for that. But yeah, I agree with you. These poll results are very flattering to the DA. It doesn't mean that they're wrong, but it's the immediate question that comes to my mind whether there's some um, inherent bias because obviously this is not an independent poll. One or two other things that I wonder about, Jonathan, um, especially when it comes to looking at the metro numbers, apart from the fact that the DA's numbers look high, the percentage of the vote accounted for in the metros by the 5 or 6 largest parties is at 90 or above 90%. And yet, when you look at the same cumulative share of the vote for the 6 largest parties, according to the national figures, it's more like 80%. It makes me wonder if, like many other polls, there are complications with
Mm.
accurately capturing the shares of the vote that are going to smaller parties. It becomes much harder to design polls when you have this multi-party democracy that we do with so many different parties. Just as a thought exercise, a margin of error of 8% at the metro level, Jonathan, and what that means is if you've got a poll result that says DA on 40% and Johannesburg and ANC on 23% in Johannesburg, you could take 8 percentage points of the DA and add them to the ANC, and it would be within the same margins of error.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
rather than 40% to 23%, you could have 32% to 31%, just as an extreme example.
yeah.
Highly unlikely, but statistically as likely given the margin of error. Highly unlikely that all the losses from the DA would go to the ANC, but it would mean, for example, that the 17 percentage point spread that the poll says is there is as statistically likely as just a 1 percentage point spread. Something
Mm.
that we have to keep in mind. I'd love for more polls to be leaked so we can study them further, but I'm sure that the DA is going to tighten things up on their back end over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. And hopefully we can get our teeth into a few more public polls. But I think what it does show is that maybe with the exception of the city of Cape Town, where there's still quite a decent chance that the DA can retain their outright majority, we are looking at coalitions across the board, and it's going to be quite interesting to see these trends, and also to be fair to the DA, I think an unnamed spokesperson that the City Press and Report spoke to did indicate that the smaller parties are probably underrepresented because of the high margin of error. So let's see how this progresses. But Paul, maybe because as we often say, it wouldn't be a recording for the two of us if we didn't talk a little bit more about the city of Johannesburg. So, city of Johannesburg, ANC incredibly vulnerable, as we know, and they're going to continue to be vulnerable. The DA with the prospective Helen Zille mayoral candidacy is going to be fairly strong. They are still facing an ultimatum or a deadline from the finance minister of Enoch Godongwana in respect of financial matters. There's also the famous Lillian Ngoyi deadline. And maybe actually, I think Godongwana has issued an ultimatum to other municipalities, but maybe on Joburg, all deadlines, all roads lead to Monday, the 1st of September.
Yes, I think that Morero and his team seem to have headed off the ultimatum from Godongwana, because last week Morero replied to Godongwana's letter asking him what's he going to do about all this unauthorized, wasteful, fruitless, and irregular expenditure. And Morero responded with a laundry list of what was going to be done, and that there would be investigations, and they would resolve this issue of all this irregular expenditure. But irregular expenditure doesn't start and end in Johannesburg, unfortunately. Godongwana has issued the same letter and the same ultimatum with, as you've said, the Monday deadline at the end of this month to municipalities across KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, Jonathan. He's alerted the MECs of cooperative governance in those two provinces. I believe it's a DA MEC in KZN, it's an ANC MEC in the Eastern Cape, and it's the big municipalities, Jonathan. In KZN, it's eThekwini and Msunduzi, as well as a few others, where the irregular, unauthorized, wasteful, and fruitless expenditures in the hundreds of millions on a quarterly basis, cumulatively. And Buffalo City stands out like a sore thumb in the Eastern Cape. So again, 3 of our 8 metros unable to control unauthorized expenditure. Godongwana looks angry. If the transcription of his letter is anything to go by, he compared the levels of wasteful expenditure across the last quarter of the 2024 calendar year, first quarter of 2025, which is the latest figures. I'm not sure if it was cumulative overall or for one of the provinces, but he said the figure by the end of December last year was about 180 million rand, and it had ballooned to 220, 230 just a quarter later. So as per Godongwana's letter, Jonathan, he said, you're not trying to recover the money. If you are trying to recover the money, your attempts aren't working. And they have until Monday to submit their own interventions the way Morero did in Johannesburg, or face the cut off of their conditional grants. And we don't have time to chat about it now, but there's a growing trend, Jonathan, of Treasury taking over functions, not just of struggling municipalities, of which we have too many, but of other government departments. We are seeing a re-centralization under Treasury. And I can't help but think that because of our budget pressures over the first half of this year, that Godongwana and his team are taking a much harder approach to any wasteful expenditure, looking for any legal reasons to turn off the taps just to balance the books, if you'll excuse the mixed metaphor.
No, not at all. Yeah, well, they have no choice, and they're being sensible, but it does pose a lot of questions about growing, and you've pointed this out before, growing government centralization, because the Treasury is going to become this all-powerful beast. And ultimately, I think throughout all of this, it's the voters and citizens of municipalities in KZN, the Eastern Cape, and obviously Joburg that are suffering.
Yes,
Um,
and
yeah,
one last point, Jonathan. This is an election year, as we know. Godongwana is seriously contemplating cutting off hundreds of millions of conditional grants that need to go to very urgent infrastructure projects, which they won't go into now. It's going to make the situations in those municipalities, as we said, including the two metros we spoke about, it's going to make it more desperate. It's going to make living conditions harder for citizens there, and it's going to increase the chances in eThekwini, in Msunduzi, in Nelson, in Buffalo City, excuse me, that the ANC could lose its majority
yeah,
and do worse than expected next year.
yeah. So again, on the subject of elections, and to wrap up our conversation today, so there were some by-elections last week, which, Paul, I think were very interesting because they were quite a nice follow-on to your excellent piece that I think we actually need to do a bespoke podcast on, about the PA's growth in the Western Cape and its threat to the ANC and the DA. But last week, the PA demonstrated in very practical terms how threatening it is to both the ANC and the DA. So there were two by-elections in the Western Cape, one in Ward 3, Knysna, where the ANC narrowly beat the PA by 31 votes. So the PA grew from 8% to 48% in percentage terms. And then in Matsikama, in Ward 7, the DA had a narrow victory of 166 votes, where the PA grew from 6% to 37% of the vote. And what I find notable about both the by-elections is that these are not your by-elections where you're looking at kind of 12 to 18% voter turnout. These are by-elections which are heavily contested. I think both had voter turnout in excess of 50%, maybe slightly higher than actually in the local government election. So the trends are statistically materialistic, if I can, or material, should I say, if I can use that term.
They are, Jonathan, and thanks for the shout out. Please, everyone, go read the article. It's not titled a very exciting way. It's our latest by-election review, and the previous piece on the PA in the Western Cape. But the same trends that we discussed in the PA in the Western Cape were repeated in the by-election results last week, Wednesday. As you said, the PA is giving the DA a fright for the main part in the Western Cape, but also the ANC. Just one point, and this is mentioned in the general by-election roundup last week, Jonathan. Matsikama is one of a few, that Ward 7 in Matsikama, it's one of a few where the ward's been contested in by-elections more than once
Yeah,
since
yeah,
2021. So I think what's important to mention is that this ward was won by the PA in 2021, and then it was lost to the DA in July of 2022, and then actually defended by the DA as an incumbent last week. So, as you said, the PA has grown quite considerably compared to the percentage of the vote it got in 2021. But we saw in July 2022 the start of the party's the retention of the vote that it got in 2021 and also in 2024 there as well. So this is a war that's gone back and forth between the DA and the PA.
yeah. No, thanks, Paul. And if you are up to it, which I suspect you will be, I think it would be good to do a 30 to 45 minute special going through your visualizations on the PA in a podcast format, because I think it's a very, very insightful look into what the effect on the Western Cape could be. Obviously, the more rural municipalities, but you do allude in your article to the potential threat that there could be in places like Drakenstein and the city of Cape Town itself. So I think that would be good. It would let me not be remiss and also mention that the ANC did retain awarded contested in King Sabata Dalindyebo in Umtata, where the ANC, I think, grew marginally, won the ward with 44% of the vote. But an independent was quite strong in that particular ward. But it does seem in that part of the country, at least, that the ANC is relatively holding. But there aren't many sort of options there for the voters at this point in time, and turnout, unlike the Western Cape by-elections, is relatively low.
Yes, a much quieter ward last Wednesday, Jonathan, but it might not stay that way forever. We don't have time today, but there have been some interesting developments in the ATM party,
Yes,
whose home base is Mthatha.
yes.
Um, some lurid details we won't talk about. Go check out the articles. But what is interesting in terms of the road to 2026, Jonathan, is that ATM and MK are in advanced talks to work together to contest elections. We know that a strategy that was very effective for MK and Zuma was partnering with faith-based organizations,
Yes.
including former Chief Justice Mogoeng. And ATM is currently, the current leadership is very much church-based, and this might be a continuation of MK's electoral strategy. The DA might not be safe even in Mthatha next year. I mean,
Um,
pardon me, the ANC.
I was wondering if there's some big trend that I've completely missed, but yes, it's look, I'm very excited about next year's local government election. It's going to be fascinating, and we here to bring you as much as we can about that. So on that note, let's wrap up. There's a lot that we've been putting out and writing about on the Substack, which we will bring into the podcast world. So as mentioned, please look out for our podcast on the PA's growth in the Western Cape. We'll also be looking at some podcast follow-ups to what we're calling the State of series. So look out for those posts on Substack, where we've looked at the state of the ANC, the state of the DA, the state of MK. We will shortly have a post on the state of the EFF, and it'll be good to talk through that. Also, over the next couple of weeks, we'll have a few exciting podcasts with some special guests, which we will promote in due course. So please do share and like as widely as you possibly can. Paul, as ever, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Always a pleasure, Jonathan. Lovely to have you back. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure our viewers have also missed you. We've caught up a lot of the news backlog. We'll tackle anything remaining next week. And yes, as you said, Jonathan, please look out for some special podcasts, some special guests, a deeper look into some of our data-led analysis over the next few weeks.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.